Hello again and a warm welcome back. I hope this video finds you in good health. During the previous chapter we looked back at the history of Holocaust art, beginning with paintings, drawings and sculptures made by victims and survivors, before moving on to talk about music and films inspired by the tragedy. We then rounded off our analysis by highlighting a few examples of how the Holocaust has been portrayed in the video game industry, which is important again because I am suggesting here that the Silent Hill franchise is just another addition to an ever-growing list of games that may come to reference this controversial topic. During this video we're briefly going to look at Japan's connections to the Holocaust, which is important to consider here of course, given that the game's developers were Japanese. We are also going to look at a possible reason for why the developers had chosen to name the original game as Silent Hill. Let's begin. So you might be wondering what connection Japan could possibly have to the legacy of the Holocaust. It was after all a very Eurocentric tragedy and one that occurred some 5,000 miles away from the islands of Japan. Well, to answer this we need to go back to the closing moments of World War II and to the ever-controversial atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It is worth noting here that the Japanese mainland had been subject to a sustained bombing campaign for at least a year prior to the atomic bombings, with the US Air Force firstly attacking remote military targets and then later controversially switching to bombing urban areas with the deliberate intention of killing civilians, something that the Allies would also be known for here in Europe. We will come back to discuss this at a future date, as there may be a cheeky reference to this to be found in Silent Hill 4. As the months went by, several Japanese cities were almost completely razed to the ground by the incessant American bombing, but despite the widespread damage and civilian casualties numbering in the hundreds of thousands, stern defiance, likely born from traditional Japanese honour, would thwart any ideas of capitulation. With the war in Europe already long over by the summer of 1945 and with Soviet eyes firmly turning towards the Japanese islands, the United States attempted to bring an end to the War in the Pacific campaign by unleashing the destructive power of their top-secret Manhattan Project. On August 6, 1945, at approximately 8:10 in the morning, a B-29 superfortress nicknamed Enola Gay flew over the Japanese city of Hiroshima and unleashed the most powerful weapon the world had ever seen. Just a few minutes later, most of Hiroshima was erased from existence, taking with it the lives of tens of thousands of innocent civilians. Later on, following the sickening effects of radioactive fallout, the casualties would top 140,000. Rather than throwing the proverbial towel in, the Japanese leaders, disbelieving of shocking reports coming out of Hiroshima, had decided to double down on their defiance. In response to this, the United States decided they'd continue to drop additional atomic bombs until Japan caved in. The next one fell just after 11 AM on August 9, 1945, upon the port city of Nagasaki. Once more, the world recoiled in horror as approximately 40,000 lives were taken in the blink of an eye. News of this second attack would thankfully bring about an end to hostilities a few days later, with a formal Japanese surrender coming on the 2nd of September 1945. This belated surrender was the final act of World War II, a tragedy that claimed nearly 100 million lives. As the dust settled on World War II, and with the islands now falling under US control, the Japanese people would largely come to see themselves not as the warmongering nation that had once terrorised the Pacific, but as victims of unjust destruction. A decade or so later, the Japanese people had victimised themselves so much that they now wanted to shockingly tie their suffering to the fate of the European Jews. Soon after, in 1963, a small group of Japanese men decided they wanted to enshrine this sense of shared suffering by walking some 5,000 miles from the epicentre of the Hiroshima bombing all the way to Oswiecim and to the heart of the Nazi atrocities, Auschwitz. And thus, the Hiroshima Auschwitz Committee had cemented a bond between the Japanese people and the tragedy of the Holocaust. This is a bond that continues to this very day, and one that I got to discuss during my attendance at the ICEAH in 2024, to which I must offer my thanks again to Mr. Pavel Savicki, press officer and educator at the ICEAH, for this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Sorry, I digress. As time went by, Japanese fascination with the tragic events of the Holocaust only continued to grow and would later ultimately lead to the establishment of the Holocaust Education Center in Fukuyama City, where visitors today can see artifacts from the Holocaust and hear testimony from survivors. In addition to this, visitors can also see a recreation of the bedroom of perhaps the most famous victim of the Holocaust, Anne Frank, and also pay reverence and reflect in a beautiful rose garden, complete with a statue of the young diarist. This again is not any kind of coincidence. The museum's creator, Japanese Holocaust researcher Makoto Otsuka, was an acquaintance of Anne's father, Otto Frank, the only member of his family to have survived the war. Mr. Frank was himself fascinated with Japanese history, and though he never came to visit Japan, he frequently received Japanese dignitaries to his home in Amsterdam and was instrumental in building bridges between Japan and the West during the post-war years. Mr. Otsuka is also not the only Japanese person to have a fascination with the story of Anne Frank. It is factually a cultural phenomenon. There are various Japanese books, comics, manga, toys, and collectibles to be found depicting the young heroine. Why do I mention Japan's fascination with the famous diarist? Well, for two main reasons. Firstly, a reminder that the game's creators are Japanese, so they're probably well aware of Japan's fascination with Anne Frank's story, and secondly, and more important to this project, we might in fact have dozens of references to Miss Frank's diary throughout both Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 3, enough I would think to fill at least 3 or 4 short analysis videos. Do you remember the strange diary on the roof of Brookhaven Hospital and how it came to a sudden end, like someone was dragged away at the last moment? Well, that might just be the tip of the proverbial iceberg. And what of the 9 red save squares that appear upon the Japanese cover art of Silent Hill 2? All will be revealed in due time. Please enjoy your pondering for now. Finally, regarding Anne Frank and the legacy of the Holocaust in Japan, it must be noted here that things are not all pro-Jewish there. In fact, far from it. As recently as 2014, anti-Semitic attacks at Japanese libraries had seen the destruction of hundreds of copies of Anne Frank's diary publication. Recent polls shockingly suggest as many as 1 in 4 Japanese adults are either outright anti-Semitic or harbour anti-Semitic traits. Yikes. Okay, so there's one more thing to discuss during this video, and that is one possible reasoning for naming the game series as Silent Hill. It couldn't be linked back to World War II, could it? Surely, you can't be serious.
I am serious, and don't call me Shirley.
So, we're close to running late again, and thus I've decided to keep this section brief. Back in 2014, some of us were fortunate enough to have played the teaser demo for Hideo Kojima's cancelled Silent Hills PT project. It was later revealed by Mr. Kojima that the studio that was producing the game was named 7780 Studios as a deliberate reference to the Japanese city of Shizuoka because its English translation is none other than Quiet or Silent Hills. Allegedly, many locals flippantly use this moniker of Silent Hill in testimony to the video game series. You might consider this as just a coincidence, I'm sure, but I'm going to highlight an interesting piece of history here that might just change your mind. So, back in June 1945, Shizuoka was all but destroyed by American B-29 bombers, who deliberately dropped more than 13,000 incendiary bombs upon the defenceless city in a deliberate attempt to kill the innocent civilians below. More than 2,000 would become victims, and many of these were burned alive during the ensuing firestorm. Think back to the first Silent Hill video game for a moment here. Do you recall the air raid sirens as the game world transitioned from the fog world to the nightmarish otherworld? Was this a way to have a sly dig at American gamers by making them fearful of the sound of an air raid siren and what horrors were soon to follow? It is worth mentioning here, of course, that the American gaming market was the main destination for this game, obviously, and also that the main antagonist of the first Silent Hill game was factually a serious burns victim. Okay, that's it for this video. Next up we're going to be taking a look at the main protagonist of Silent Hill 2, James Sunderland, and explore his links to the enigmatic Pyramid Head monster, whom I'd earlier theorised was artistically depictive of a Nazi butcher, a historical perpetrator of the Holocaust. We will also analyse the etymology of James's chosen name, because it may have some interesting connections to a very unpopular politician who was in the news at the time of the game's development. This politician also has some dark family history that very much ties him to the Nazis. I'll see you there. Take care. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.